Welcome to the Enigma of the Silent Sentinel, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Consulting Detective's War. Holmes in WWI, playing in the year 1916. It is with a profound sense of duty, and indeed some surprise, that I present these accounts, long confined to the classified dossiers of the War Office. Only recent declassification, pieced together by diligent archivists, allows me to share Mr. Sherlock Holmes's clandestine contributions during the Great War. Between 1914 and 1918, at his brother Mycroft's behest, Holmes navigated a perilous world of espionage, far from the familiar fogs of Baker Street, applying his unique genius to counter enemy plots where information was the deadliest weapon. These are the records of the consulting detective's war. Let us then turn to one such perilous undertaking from those shadowed years. I shall now recount the singular affair I have entitled The Enigma of the Silent Sentinel. Chapter 1. The London morning was a symphony in grey, a thick November fog pressing against our Baker Street windows. The usual clatter of milk carts and cries of newsboys were muffled, as if heard through layers of wool. Inside, the cheerful crackle of the fire in our grate did little to dispel the gloom that seemed to seep in with the mist. Holmes, ever restless, paced before the hearth, the soft scuff of his slippers on the rug a familiar counterpoint to the fire's song. Then a sharp, insistent rapping at the front door cut through the quiet, each knock echoing in the stillness. A moment later, the hurried footsteps of Mrs. Hudson were followed by the appearance of a breathless messenger boy, his cap askew. He panted softly as he thrust a buff-colored envelope into my hand. It bore the stark red seal of the War Office. His pacing ceased abruptly. "Well, Watson, do not keep me in suspense. The post is early, and such liveried urgency speaks volumes," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I passed him the telegram. He tore it open with a quick rip of paper, his keen eyes devouring the contents. A frown creased his brow. "A summons from Major Alistair Finch," he announced, his voice holding a note of dry amusement. "It appears the military machine requires a touch of unofficial lubrication. We are to present ourselves at the Damascus Bureau with all haste," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The Damascus Bureau. The name itself was whispered in certain circles, a clandestine establishment known for its impenetrable secrecy and its vital, if unseen, contributions to the war effort. I confess, a thrill of anticipation, a quickening of my own pulse, ran through me despite the somber implications of any summons from such a quarter. The Damascus Bureau, Holmes. What manner of affair could drag them into the light? Dr. John Watson replied. "Precisely what we must discover, my dear Watson," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes' voice took on a note of excitement. "The telegram speaks of a matter of grave importance concerning national security. Fetch your hat and coat. It seems our quiet morning is at an end." Our hansom cab rattled and swayed through the fog-choked streets. The rhythmic clopping of the horses' hooves on the slick cobbles provided a steady beat, a stark contrast to the growing disquiet in my own chest. The wheels splashed through unseen puddles, the sound quickly absorbed by the dense air. We journeyed to a part of London I little knew, a grim district of towering warehouses. Their dark forms loomed through the mist, flanking narrow, shadowed alleyways from which no sound seemed to escape, save perhaps the scurrying of rats. The Damascus Bureau itself was an unassuming edifice of soot-stained brick, its very plainness a calculated disguise. Stern-faced sentries guarded every approach, their boots crunching softly on the damp pavement with each turn. Their rifles glinted dully in the weak light, and their sharp challenges, when they came, echoed briefly before being swallowed by the oppressive fog. A heavy oaken door, reinforced with iron bands, creaked open with a protesting groan to admit us. Inside, we found a surprisingly modern interior. The air within hummed with a suppressed energy, a stark contrast to the silence of the streets outside. Our boots clicked loudly on the polished stone floor of a wide, echoing corridor, devoid of ornament save for the occasional closed door, each footstep resounding in the emptiness. We were met by a tall, uniformed figure whose bearing was ramrod straight. Major Alastair Finch, I presumed. His voice was clipped, every syllable imbued with military precision. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you made good time. The situation is pressing," replied Major Alastair Finch. His gaze was direct, assessing, and held little warmth. He was a man accustomed to command, and perhaps unaccustomed to civilian interference, however renowned. "So your telegram intimated, Major. We are at your disposal," stated Sherlock Holmes. "He is the architect of the device in question," replied Major Alastair Finch. Mr. Pendelton was a man of contrasting aspect to the Major. Shorter, somewhat stooped, with wisps of grey hair escaping an otherwise neat coiffure. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, darted nervously between Holmes and his military superior. He clutched a sheaf of blueprints, the papers whispering faintly with his agitated grip, as if they were a lifeline. His fingers were stained with ink. His voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly robust, though tinged with an undeniable agitation that caused it to quaver slightly. "A pleasure, Mr. Holmes, though the circumstances deeply regrettable, deeply," replied Mr. Pendelton. Major Finch led us into a sparsely furnished briefing room. A large map of the Western Front dominated one wall. The only sounds were the distant, rhythmic thrum of unseen machinery and the nervous rustle of Pendelton's papers as he shifted his weight. "Gentlemen," he began, his tone grave, "you are here because of the Sentinel, our most advanced acoustic detection device, designed to pinpoint enemy artillery emplacements with unparalleled accuracy. It is, without exaggeration, a cornerstone of our battlefield intelligence," said Major Alastair Finch. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The very air in the room seemed to grow heavier, the thrumming of the distant machinery more pronounced in the silence. The engineer interjected, his voice rising with a protective fervor that made the blueprints in his hand crinkle audibly. "The Sentinel is a masterpiece of auditory science, Major. Its sensitivity is exquisite," Mr. Pendelton said. "Indeed, Mr. Pendelton," Finch conceded, a hint of impatience in his otherwise controlled voice, a slight tightening around his jaw. "Yet, for the past fortnight, this exquisite sensitivity has become a liability. The Sentinel has begun to malfunction, providing false positives. Tragically, these errors have led to friendly fire incidents. Good men lost, Mr. Holmes, because our own guns were directed by faulty intelligence," remarked Major Alastair Finch. Holmes, who had been listening with rapt attention, his chin resting upon his steepled fingers, now leaned forward. The slight creak of his chair was the only sound accompanying the movement in the otherwise still room. "And these malfunctions, Major?" he inquired, his voice cutting through the tension, sharp and clear as a struck bell. "Are they consistent? Do they follow a pattern, or are they entirely random in their treachery?" declared Sherlock Holmes. "That is part of the enigma, Mr. Holmes. There appears to be no discernible pattern. Technical diagnostics have revealed nothing. Mr. Pendelton assures me the device is mechanically sound," Major Alastair Finch said. "Perfectly sound," Pendelton affirmed, thumping his rolled blueprints on the table for emphasis, the impact causing a faint echo in the austere room. "It must be some unprecedented atmospheric interference, or something beyond our current understanding," responded Mr. Pendelton. "Interesting," Holmes mused, his eyes gleaming with that familiar light of intellectual pursuit. "Most interesting. It is clear that reports and schematics alone will not suffice. Major Finch, I must examine this silent sentinel myself, in situ, and the sooner the better," explained Sherlock Holmes. A look of relief, mingled with apprehension, crossed Major Finch's face. He let out a slow breath. The prospect of Holmes's direct involvement was clearly a double-edged sword for the military man. Yet the gravity of the situation left him little choice. The stage was set for a journey into the heart of a most perplexing mystery. As we stepped from the motor car onto Salisbury Plain, the vast, wind-swept expanse stretched before us. A chilling breeze whipped about us, relentless and carrying the faint, earthy scent of distant rain. Before us stood a collection of low, utilitarian structures, their outlines stark against the grey sky, the wind whistling faintly around their unadorned corners. This, our terse military driver had informed us, was the experimental station housing the silent Sentinel. The very air seemed taut, vibrating with a mixture of secrecy and urgency. A figure detached itself from the largest of the buildings and hurried towards us, his coat flapping audibly in the persistent wind. This was Mr. Pendelton, the chief engineer, a man whose reputation for brilliance was, I noted, matched by a somewhat disheveled appearance, as if he had spent many sleepless nights wrestling with his work. The crunch of our boots on the gravel path seemed unnaturally loud in the otherwise stark quiet of the compound, a quiet broken only by that ceaseless, mournful moan of the wind through unseen wires strung between the buildings. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, a dubious honor under these perplexing circumstances. The device is this way. We've kept it entirely isolated since the last incident, Mr. Pendelton said. He gestured towards a sturdy, windowless shed, its heavy door firmly shut. A low, almost imperceptible hum, like the thrumming of a distant, powerful engine, emanated from within. As we stepped inside, following Pendelton, the air struck us as noticeably cooler than outside, tinged with the sharp metallic scent of machinery and the distinct, clean tang of ozone. The silent sentinel itself dominated the enclosed space. It was an extraordinary contraption, a testament to intricate craftsmanship, constructed of gleaming brass and polished dark wood, materials that spoke of both precision and expense. Its most prominent features were a series of enormous, funnel-shaped horns, reminiscent of gigantic metallic ears, angled towards the reinforced ceiling as if straining to capture whispers from the very heavens. One could not help but be impressed by its sheer scale and evident complexity, yet a palpable sense of disquiet, an unspoken wrongness, hung about the magnificent machine. Holmes, without a word, began his examination. His tall, spare figure moved with a quiet, focused intensity, his keen eyes, which I knew missed nothing, darting from one component to another. He produced his familiar lens, and I heard the faint rasp as he polished it for a moment on his handkerchief before he began his scrutiny of the intricate, almost web-like wiring. His fingers, long and sensitive, lightly traced the polished surfaces of the listening horns, then moved to the numerous gauges and levers, each touched with a questioning delicacy that spoke of deep concentration. Mr. Pendelton hovered nearby, fidgeting, his breath catching audibly, a small, anxious hiss in the otherwise quiet room, whenever Holmes paused for an extended period over a particular section. The only other sounds were the persistent, faint hum of the apparatus itself, and the occasional soft, metallic click of Holmes's lens case opening or closing as he selected different magnifications. Minutes stretched into what felt like an age, the silence in the shed broken only by the device's low, resonant thrum and Pendelton's nervous breathing. Then Holmes straightened from his crouched position, his gaze fixed intently upon a small, seemingly insignificant access panel, no larger than my palm, set into the smooth interior curve of one of the largest brass horns. He beckoned us closer with a slight, almost imperceptible movement of his head. With a delicate touch, using the fine tip of a slender steel probe he produced from his waistcoat pocket, he indicated a minuscule abrasion, a tiny, almost invisible scratch, near the panel's edge. Then, angling his powerful lens towards the interior of the panel's small, glass-fronted seal, He directed our attention to something held within its confines. Gentlemen, observe this supposedly hermetically sealed chamber. Here we find not only almost microscopic scratches indicating forced entry, but also the minute, desiccated remains of a creature known as Acrida ungarica. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. An insect inside a sealed unit. Preposterous. That's, that's merely some form of common dust, surely, replied Mr. Pendelton. Holmes offered no immediate verbal rebuke. Instead, the slight, deliberate arch of one eyebrow and a moment of pointed silence served as a more eloquent dismissal of Pendelton's hasty, defensive conclusion. Hardly common dust, Mr. Pendelton. This particular species of grasshopper, I happen to know, is native exclusively to the Pannonian Basin, a region currently, shall we say, of considerable interest to our adversaries. Its presence here, within a component designed to be inviolable, coupled with these telltale marks of tampering, however subtle, points to a conclusion far removed from simple mechanical failure or environmental contamination, replied Sherlock Holmes. The implications of Holmes's words hung heavy in the cool, metallic-scented air of the shed. Sabotage. The word itself seemed to echo off the hard surfaces. Deliberate, sophisticated, and originating from deep within enemy territory. Pendelton made a small, choked sound. His face, previously flushed with indignation, now paling visibly. His earlier defensiveness crumbled, replaced by an almost palpable dismay that radiated from him in waves. The question is not if it was sabotage, but how. I should like to speak with the personnel who operate and maintain this apparatus. Immediately, if you please, Sherlock Holmes noted. Mr. Pendelton, still somewhat dazed by the swift, undeniable revelation, nodded mutely. He seemed to swallow hard before leading us from the shed, through a short corridor, and into an adjoining office. The atmosphere here was different, less overtly mechanical, more focused on human observation and control. Two uniformed operators were at their posts, seated before panels of instruments and charts that papered the walls. One was a fresh-faced young man, perhaps not yet 20, who looked up with wide, nervous eyes as we entered, his attention clearly snagged by our unexpected appearance. The other, a woman, was introduced by Pendelton in a somewhat subdued tone as Sergeant Eva Rostova. She possessed a contrasting and remarkable composure. She met Holmes's direct gaze without flinching, her own eyes holding a steady, intelligent scrutiny that I saw immediately captured my friend's undivided attention. Her stillness, the quiet confidence in her posture as she sat before her console, was a stark contrast to Pendelton's lingering agitation and the young operator's evident unease. Sergeant Rostova, I understand you possess a particularly acute sense of hearing. Your observations regarding the device's recent behavior will be invaluable, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. For the briefest of moments, an unreadable expression, perhaps surprise, perhaps careful calculation, touched Sergeant Rostova's otherwise composed features. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a slight, formal inclination of her head in acknowledgement. I had the distinct impression that her voice, when she chose to use it, would be as controlled and precise as her demeanor. I sensed that Holmes, with his unerring instinct for the significant detail and the pivotal personality, had already marked her as a figure of particular interest in this rapidly unfolding drama. As we stood on the cusp of the interviews, the wind, which had been our constant, sighing companion on the plain, howled with renewed vigor around the eaves of the station building. Its mournful, almost sentient sound served as a fitting, atmospheric counterpoint to the silent, insidious threat Holmes had just unveiled within the very heart of the Sentinel. The true nature of this complex enigma, I felt with a familiar shiver of anticipation mixed with foreboding, was only just beginning to reveal its shadowy depths. Holmes had finished his initial look at the silent operators. His keen eyes missed no flicker of hesitation, no bead of sweat on their brows. The grim discovery of the insect inside the Sentinel still filled the makeshift laboratory with a heavy air. It was a chill the sputtering coal stove could not dispel. The wind, always present on Salisbury Plain, moaned around the hut's eaves. It was a mournful sound that matched our grim thoughts. Just then, the hut door burst open, and Major Alistair Finch strode in. His boots struck the wooden floorboards with a firm rhythm. His commanding voice filled the small space. "Mr. Holmes, I trust you are making progress. We cannot afford for this situation to persist. Every hour the Sentinel is unreliable is an hour our artillery flies blind." Major Alistair Finch replied. Holmes turned, his expression unreadable. "Progress, Major, is a methodical creature, not to be hurried," Holmes replied, his tone measured. "However, I would now like to speak with Sergeant Eva Rostova. Her remarkable auditory acuity may prove invaluable," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Major Finch gave a curt nod. A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or suspicion, showed in his eyes before he gestured to an aide. A few moments later, Sergeant Rostova entered. She was a woman of compact build, her dark hair drawn back severely and her gaze direct. There was a quiet competence about her and a stillness that suggested a keen listener. "Sergeant," Holmes began, his tone surprisingly gentle, "you have operated the Sentinel since it was installed. Have you noticed any odd things about how it works beyond the reported failures? Any sounds, however faint, that seemed out of place?" Sherlock Holmes said. Her reply was low and steady, with just a hint of an accent I could not quite place. "Sir, the device itself produces a low hum, quite consistent. Before a malfunction, sometimes I believe I hear a faint, very high-pitched whine. Almost too faint to notice. Others have not heard it," Sergeant Eva Rostova said. "A high-pitched whine," Holmes repeated, his eyes glinting. "Interesting. And these malfunctions, do they follow a pattern?" stated Sherlock Holmes. "They seem random, sir, though perhaps more frequent when the air is still, when the wind is low," responded Sergeant Eva Rostova. Holmes thanked her, and she left with the same quiet efficiency. He then turned his attention to the device itself. He asked for it to be activated so he could observe it. We moved into the cramped control room. The Sentinel's equipment filled one entire wall with its dials, wires, and gleaming brass horns. The air thrummed with a low, pulsing hum that vibrated through the floor, a barely contained energy. From time to time, a nearby wireless set crackled with static. The distant, rhythmic thud of artillery practice provided a somber backdrop. Holmes stood before the machine, head cocked, absorbing every sound. The device's hum, the rustle of log pages, and even Major Finch's impatient shifting, marked by the creak of his leather belt, all contributed to the auditory tableau. At last Holmes looked up. A thin smile played on his lips. "Watson, Major Finch, look at these entries. The official reports state catastrophic signal degradation, a complete failure of the signal. Yet Sergeant Rostova, whose hearing is clearly better than most, notes something before it happens, a high-pitched whine. What's more, the timings of these random failures, see here, and here, they often happen right after routine maintenance checks. These are checks on other systems in this facility, systems that have nothing to do with the Sentinel. But these checks require outside doors to be opened for short periods," remarked Sherlock Holmes. I peered at the logs, but I could not immediately see the connections he was making. Finch, however, scowled. He spoke with a sharp edge to his voice. "Are you suggesting, Mr. Holmes, that our own maintenance routines are somehow causing this, or that this insect you found is being deliberately introduced?" Major Alistair Finch replied. "The second idea seems more likely, Major," Holmes replied calmly. "The insect is the key. It being here is no accident. The question now is how its special qualities could be used to interfere with a device like this." Sergeant Rostova's high-pitched whine may be more important than she realizes. It suggests a particular effect on sound. To understand that, Watson, we will need an expert, someone who studies the more unusual side of natural science, specifically an insect expert, an entomologist who also understands sound or acoustics, declared Sherlock Holmes. An entomologist. The idea seemed absurd. How could insects relate to military spying and advanced sound-detecting machines? Yet, knowing Holmes, I understood his strange idea was based on pure logic. The doubts about the Sentinel were starting to form a much darker and more complex picture. The inconsistencies we had unearthed in the malfunction reports from the Damascus Bureau preyed upon my mind. Watson, Holmes remarked, breaking the silence of our Baker Street rooms the following morning. The clatter of a milk cart from the street below, accompanied by the distant cry of a newsboy, punctuated his words. Mere technical failure seems increasingly improbable. There is a pattern, subtle yet insistent, that speaks of a guiding intelligence. He rose, his tall, spare figure casting a long shadow in the early light filtering through the grimy windowpane. Our inquiries must now take us into a rather more esoteric field. We shall consult Dr. Heinrich Weber, explained Sherlock Holmes. Weber, I queried, my brow furrowing. The name sounds decidedly Teutonic for these troubled times, Holmes, remarked Dr. John Watson. Holmes offered a thin smile. Indeed, Watson. Dr. Weber is, by birth, German, but has long held Swiss nationality and an esteemed professorship at King's College, a position secured a full decade before this current conflict. His expertise in entomology, particularly concerning obscure insect species, has proven invaluable to the Crown on matters of utmost sensitivity. He is thoroughly vetted, I assure you, and his discretion is as notable as his intellect. Sherlock Holmes responded. A hansom cab, its wheels grinding on the damp cobbles and the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves echoing in the narrow street, soon deposited us before the grey, scholastic facade of the university. We were shown into a laboratory, a space filled with the faint, not unpleasant scent of chemicals and preservative spirits, and the quiet rustle of turning pages from an adjoining office. Glass cases lined the walls, showcasing pinned insects of every conceivable size and hue, their delicate forms casting intricate shadows. Dr. Heinrich Weber himself, a man of middle height with keen, spectacled eyes and a neatly trimmed grey beard, greeted us with a polite, almost formal inclination of his head. His voice, when he spoke, was precise, carrying only the faintest trace of a continental accent. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, an honor. To what do I owe this unexpected visit from gentlemen of your particular renown? Said Dr. Heinrich Weber. Holmes wasted no time on preamble. With practiced precision, he produced a small, meticulously sealed tin. The laboratory fell silent as he carefully tipped a few almost dust-like fragments onto a clean glass slide on Weber's workbench. The soft scrape of metal against glass punctuated the hushed atmosphere. Dr. Weber, we are investigating a matter of grave national importance. Certain highly sensitive acoustic equipment has been subject to inexplicable interference. I have reason to believe that the source may be biological, stated Sherlock Holmes. Weber adjusted his spectacles, leaning closer. He selected a fine pair of tweezers and a powerful lens, his movements deft and economical. A low hum emanated from some unseen apparatus in the corner of the laboratory, a steady thrumming that vibrated almost imperceptibly through the floorboards. After several minutes of intense scrutiny, during which the only sounds were the doctor's occasional soft breath, the minute click of his tweezers against the slide, and the distant chime of a college clock, he straightened. Extraordinary. These are fragments, highly desiccated, of Cicadetta montana, the new forest cicada, or rather, a very close relative. What is most peculiar, gentlemen, is that this specific variant, judging by the wing venation remnants, is not native to these isles. Its origins, I would surmise, lie further east, perhaps the Balkans or even Anatolia, Dr. Heinrich Weber said. And its acoustic properties, Doctor, stated Sherlock Holmes. Weber nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. Ah, therein lies the crux. Cicadas, as you know, are famed for their sound production. This particular family produces a very high-pitched sound, often too high for us to hear easily, but sensitive listening equipment would certainly pick it up. If many of these insects were present, or even just their dried remains vibrated by the machinery, they could create significant noise. This unwanted sound could easily interfere with, or even completely hide, the specific sounds your device is trying to detect. And if introduced deliberately, said Dr. Heinrich Weber. Deliberately, I interjected, startled by the implication. Dr. John Watson commented. Weber affirmed, his gaze meeting mine. Indeed, Dr. Watson. Consider the possibilities. Live insects could be released near the equipment. Or, as these fragments suggest, dried parts of the insects, perhaps even ground into a powder, could be carefully placed inside the device itself. Even a slight vibration from the machine or a current of air could make these fragments vibrate and produce those interfering sounds. Dr. Heinrich Weber said. Holmes steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on some distant point. The Anatolian variant, you say, Doctor, that is most suggestive. It implies a deliberate selection, a knowledge of both entomology and the operational theater of this war. These are not the actions of a mere bungler. You have been most illuminating, Doctor. Your expertise confirms a critical line of my reasoning. If these insects are the agents of disruption, then their introduction was no accident, declared Sherlock Holmes. The challenge, Mr. Holmes, would be to introduce them without immediate detection and in sufficient quantity or form to be effective. It would require careful planning and access, replied Dr. Heinrich Weber. As we took our leave, the heavy oak door of the laboratory closing behind us with a soft thud and the click of the latch, Holmes's pace quickened. The scent of old parchment and floor wax, mingled with the faint, lingering aroma of carbolic acid from the labs, filled the hushed corridor. Access, Watson, that is the key. These foreign visitors did not fly into the Damascus Bureau's most sensitive equipment on their own wings. Someone facilitated their journey. Our next step must be to observe Mr. Pendelton and his team more closely. The whispers we seek are likely to be found within the workshop itself, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The insights gleaned from Dr. Weber regarding the insidious capabilities of those non-native insects lent a fresh urgency to our return to the Damascus Bureau. The chill of the London morning clung to our coats as we stepped into the heart of the Damascus Bureau, Mr. Pendelton's workshop. It was a cavernous space, filled with the low hum of machinery and the intermittent, sharp clang of metal striking metal. A faint scent of ozone and hot oil hung in the air, a testament to the ceaseless industry within. He paused just inside the doorway, his keen eyes sweeping the scene. Observe, Watson, a hive of activity, yet a certain disquiet pervades the atmosphere, does it not? Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Indeed, the men at their benches, though diligently at work, cast furtive glances towards us. Their conversations, previously a low murmur, seemed to cease altogether as we entered, a sudden hush falling over the benches. Mr. Pendelton himself approached, his usual ebullience conspicuously absent. The worry was plain on his face, and the rhythmic ticking of a large regulator clock on the far wall seemed to amplify the underlying tension in the now quieter room. His voice, usually so assured, now cracked with strain, shifting in pitch as he spoke. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, any progress? The device, it failed again this morning. Catastrophically, answered Mr. Pendelton. We are making headway, Mr. Pendelton, Holmes replied, his tone measured yet firm. With your permission, we should like to observe your men at their tasks. Unobtrusively, of course, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Pendelton nodded distractedly, a vague gesture indicating the bustling room, before retreating to his glass-walled office. From within, we could almost feel his hawk-like gaze upon us, a silent, intense scrutiny. Holmes, for his part, began a slow perambulation of the workshop. His attention seemed to absorb every detail. Schematics pinned to boards, components arrayed on workbenches, and the very hands that assembled them. The air was thick with the sounds of delicate filing, the occasional whir of a small lathe, and the rustle of paper. After some minutes, his attention became riveted upon a drafting table in a slightly more secluded alcove. The rhythmic sounds of the main workshop were somewhat muted here, creating a pocket of relative quiet. Upon it, beneath a veneer of casual disarray, lay a set of technical drawings. Holmes leaned closer, a stillness about him that suggested intense focus, his breathing barely audible. He beckoned me with a slight inclination of his head. Look here, Watson. These are not the master blueprints, but rather detailed sectional views. Note this annotation regarding resonant frequencies, and here, a diagram illustrating airflow patterns through the primary acoustic chamber, observed Sherlock Holmes. I leaned in, studying the complex lines and figures, their precise meaning eluding me for the moment. The scent of graphite and tracing paper was strong here, a dry, papery aroma filling the small space. I confess, Holmes, its precise significance escapes me, responded Dr. John Watson. His voice was low, almost a breath against the workshop's noises. Watson recalled Dr. Weber's insights on those insects, their uncanny attraction to certain vibrations, their talent for infiltrating the tiniest openings. These drawings, they lay bare the very weaknesses one would exploit to introduce such biological agents. In the wrong hands, this is nothing short of a roadmap for sabotage, Sherlock Holmes said. My blood ran a little colder at his words. As Holmes straightened, his attention shifted, drawn to a young technician working nearby. I now realized this was the same man whose nervous shifting and occasional, quickly stifled coughs I had subconsciously noted earlier when he glanced towards the drafting table. He was attempting to appear engrossed in soldering a delicate circuit. However, the slight, irregular hiss of his iron and the way his hand trembled, causing the tool to skitter with tiny, sharp sounds against the metal, betrayed his agitation. Holmes approached him directly, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Young man, a word, if you please. These schematics, are they your work? Sherlock Holmes responded. The technician started with a small, audible gasp, his soldering iron clattering precariously on the bench. He swallowed hard, a dry click distinct in the sudden quiet around his station, and a bead of sweat became visible on his temple, glistening under the workshop lights. His voice was thin and reedy. No, sir, not mine. I merely consult them occasionally, replied technician. He avoided Holmes's direct gaze, his eyes darting towards the workshop exit as if measuring the distance for an escape. The rhythmic hum of a nearby dynamo seemed to pulse in time with his palpable agitation, a low thrumming that filled any momentary silence. Indeed, and who last had access to them or made copies? Such detailed information regarding acoustic vulnerabilities would be of immense interest to certain parties, would it not? Holmes's tone was like chilled steel, each word falling with precision. Sherlock Holmes said, I cannot say, sir. We all look at plans, he stammered, his breath catching audibly, his face paling considerably as he wiped a clammy hand on his apron with a rustling sound. Technician replied. The man was clearly terrified, his responses mere evasions, offering no concrete information. Holmes remained silent for a moment, his scrutiny intense, a palpable pressure that I knew could pierce the most hardened of facades. Under this unwavering attention, the technician seemed to shrink, his earlier nervous energy deflating into a fear so profound it was almost a scent in the air around him. He turned away from the flustered man with a slight sigh, the sound barely cutting through the workshop's hum. Watson, it is as I suspected. The leak is not merely a possibility, it is a certainty, and it originates from within these very walls. Our saboteur is not merely clever, they are exceptionally well informed. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The weight of his words settled upon me. The enemy was not at the gates, but already inside the fortress. The sounds of the workshop, which moments before had spoken of industry and innovation, now seemed to whisper of betrayal, each clank, and were a potential secret shared. The next step, Holmes continued, his voice regaining its decisive timbre as we made for the exit. The sounds of Pendelton's bewildered shuffling, and a faint, confused murmur audible behind us as he watched our departure, is to understand precisely who possesses not only the access, but also the peculiar capabilities or background that might align with such a betrayal. We must scrutinize every individual with access to sensitive data. Sergeant Rostova, for instance, with her specialized auditory knowledge and access, certainly warrants such scrutiny, as do others whose duties or histories might draw our attention. Sherlock Holmes said. His words hung in the air, a clear indication of the path our investigation must now take. The staff of the Damascus Bureau, previously just names or functions within a great machine, now each represented a potential source of treachery, a hidden current beneath the surface of their daily work. Holmes had named her directly, Sergeant Rostova. The explicit mention of her name, connecting her unique auditory skills and complex past to the potential for betrayal, hung heavy in the air. The implications were stark. Her name now a clear focal point in our investigation, resonating like an alarm finally sounded. The echoes of our abrupt interview with the young technician lingered in Mr. Pendelton's workshop. The man's guilt had seemed as plain as the grease upon his collar. Holmes quickly dismissed the fellow from his mind. His brow furrowed, his gaze distant, he paced the cluttered space. His shoes tapped a steady rhythm on the wooden floor, a sharp sound against the distant hum of machinery. The individual is merely a tendril, Watson. We must find the root. Consider the pattern of these malfunctions. Think of the sophistication needed to cause them without immediate detection. This points to a guiding intelligence, not just a disgruntled employee. We must examine those with unique access or skills. Sergeant Rostova, for example. Sherlock Holmes noted. Major Finch had rejoined us. He cleared his throat with a sound like shifting gravel. The Major preferred direct action to Holmes's more winding methods, yet he could not deny the seriousness of the situation. Sergeant Rostova. She is a highly competent signals operator, Holmes. Her record is impeccable. What grounds do you have? Major Alistair Finch answered. Her exceptional hearing, Major, and she was on duty during several key incidents. I require her full personnel file, observed Sherlock Holmes. Soon we were in the chilly military records office. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax polish. A harried clerk fetched the requested dossier. The only sound was the rustle of documents. Holmes accepted the file with a curt nod. His fingers flew through the pages with practiced speed. I watched him. The sounds from the busy outer office grew faint. The tramp of boots on linoleum, the distant, insistent ring of a telephone, all faded. My attention fixed upon his hawk-like profile. Ah, he murmured, his voice barely a breath. Interesting. Her father associated with, shall we say, enthusiastic circles. They advocated for profound change in the Russian Empire before his emigration. Sherlock Holmes noted. Revolutionaries, Holmes? I asked, my voice hushed. Dr. John Watson inquired. The term is broad, Watson, but the meaning is clear. This family background might encourage complex loyalties. Let us speak with the sergeant directly, stated Sherlock Holmes. The interrogation room was a stark contrast to the records office. It had bare walls, a single table, and 3 chairs. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic tick of a regulation clock on the wall. Each tick seemed to amplify the tension. Sergeant Eva Rostova entered, escorted by Major Finch. A woman of about 30, her face was pale but composed, her dark eyes watchful and guarded. She carried herself with military bearing, yet I sensed an undercurrent beneath it, a flicker of restless, less disciplined energy. Sergeant Rostova, Mr. Holmes has some questions for you. Cooperate fully. Major Alistair Finch replied. Sir, Sergeant Eva Rostova replied. Her reply was quiet. Her voice carried the faintest trace of her Russian heritage, a slight rolling of the R. Sergeant, your duties involve precisely calibrating and monitoring the acoustic detection device, do they not? Deduced Sherlock Holmes. They do, sir. Among other signals work, said Sergeant Eva Rostova. And you are aware of the recent inconsistencies in its performance, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I am aware of the malfunctions, yes, remarked Sergeant Eva Rostova. Your family has a history, I believe, of strong beliefs about the government of your homeland, Sergeant. Beliefs that some might call disruptive, remarked Sherlock Holmes. A flicker of defiance sparked in her eyes. The room seemed to grow colder. Even the clock's ticking seemed to pause. My father's beliefs were his own, Mr. Holmes. I am a loyal soldier of the king, responded Sergeant Eva Rostova. Indeed, loyalty can be a most flexible thing, Sergeant, especially when old loyalties clash with new duties, declared Sherlock Holmes. He paused. His words hung in the air, settling into the quiet room. Tell me, were you ever approached about your work here? Perhaps by people sympathetic to your father's former associates, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The sergeant's composure visibly faltered. Her gaze dropped to the table. For a moment, I thought she might refuse to answer. Major Finch shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The leather creaked loudly in the strained silence. I cannot discuss such matters, replied Sergeant Eva Rostova. Very well, Sergeant. That will be all for now, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The door clicked shut behind her and Major Finch, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. Holmes turned to me, his voice brisk once more. Her silence, Watson, speaks louder than any confession. There is a deeper game here. The front line, I believe, is where we must next look for answers. The whispers from the workshop led us to a secret, and that secret now points east, observed Sherlock Holmes. His sharp, decisive words cut through the lingering tension. They promised not an end, but a new, more dangerous start to our investigation. The Western Front, with its constant dangers, now loomed before us. The interview with Sergeant Rostova had left a disquieting pall over our investigation, her enigmatic composure doing little to assuage my own suspicions. Holmes, however, maintained his customary impassivity, and within hours we were en route to the continent. Our journey was a grim progression, the familiar comforts of England giving way to the stark realities of war. The rhythmic clatter of train wheels faded, giving way to the distant, guttural cough of artillery. This ominous sound grew more insistent with each mile, heralding our approach to the Western Front. A bone-jarring motorcar ride followed, its engine groaning, its chassis rattling in protest with every lurch over the rutted tracks, until it finally deposited us, caked in mud and weariness, at a camouflaged embankment, the entrance to a covert listening post. A young lieutenant, his uniform bearing the smudges of the front, yet worn with a soldier's pride, greeted us. His face was etched with fatigue, but his gaze remained direct and assessing. His voice, though low and strained from the constant tension, possessed a formal, clipped edge. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, we have been expecting you, sirs. The adjutant informed us of your arrival. The front is particularly volatile today. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp soil, stale tobacco, and the faint, metallic tang of ozone from the wireless equipment, a scent that seemed to cling to the very air. The occasional drip of condensation from the damp earth ceiling echoed softly in the confined space. Two operators, their faces pale in the dim light of a single oil lamp, hunched over a bewildering panel of glowing dials, intricate wiring, and brass connectors that formed the heart of the Sentinel device. A persistent, low electrical hum emanated from the apparatus, punctuated by bursts of sharp static that crackled like dry leaves underfoot, and overlaid by the distant, muffled thud of artillery fire, a constant, grim reminder of the war raging just beyond their earthen walls. His voice, though quiet, cut through the oppressive atmosphere. "You have experienced further malfunctions, Lieutenant," Sherlock Holmes responded. One of the operators, a corporal with deeply shadowed, haunted eyes, spoke without turning from his instruments, his tone flat, almost devoid of inflection. His words were punctuated by the soft, deliberate click of a switch he manipulated on the panel before him. "Consistent, sir, like clockwork it is. Gives a bearing we relay and then nothing, or worse, something entirely false. Nearly shelled our own patrol yesterday, we did, just yesterday," listening post operator answered. As if on cue, the Sentinel emitted a series of piercing, urgent beeps, a shrill alarm cutting through the existing low hum. The primary operator stiffened, his hand flying to adjust his headphones. "Contact. Grid reference 74 Alpha. Heavy enemy battery, sounds like." The lieutenant seized a field telephone, its crank whirring loudly, a frantic sound in the suddenly charged atmosphere as he spun it, his voice tight with urgency as he relayed the coordinates. I could hear the faint, tinny shouting of orders from the other end, then the earth-shuddering whump of our own guns responding some distance away, a profound concussion that vibrated through the very floorboards of the dugout. Moments later, a frantic, high-pitched voice crackled from the wireless set near the Sentinel, the speaker buzzing harshly, distorting the words with a blanket of interference. The voice from the wireless was distorted by panic and static. "Cease fire, cease fire. You're bracketing Captain Davies' reconnaissance party. For God's sake, cease fire," remarked front-line soldier. The lieutenant swore, his face ashen, and barked counter-orders into the telephone, the sound sharp against the sudden, heavy silence that followed. This quiet was broken only by the frantic ticking of a chronometer on the wall and the distant, receding rumble of the misdirected shells, each explosion a dull thud that seemed to resonate in one's very chest. The Sentinel, meanwhile, had fallen silent, its indicator lights blinking innocuously, a soft, rhythmic pulse in the gloom. It was a chilling demonstration, more potent than any report of the device's catastrophic failures. Holmes had observed the entire exchange with an unnerving stillness. Now he moved with swift purpose, his gaze sweeping the cramped confines of the post. The air still hummed faintly with the residual energy of the wireless transmission, and the sharp, lingering scent of ozone mixed with the ever-present cold dampness of the earth. He crouched by the ventilation shaft, a narrow aperture near the floor, its rusted metal grille cool and slightly gritty to the touch. Then he ran his fingers along the slick, damp earth outside the dugout's crude doorway, the mud squelching softly, almost obscenely, beneath his touch. The intermittent thud of distant shelling provided a grim, rhythmic counterpoint to his meticulous examination, each impact a heavy punctuation mark in the tense silence that had fallen within our immediate surroundings. He paused, picking up something almost invisible against the mud, a tiny, almost transparent shard. "Watson, come here," Holmes called softly, his voice charged with familiar intensity. "Observe this patch of disturbed earth just beyond the threshold." He held up a faintly glinting shard. "And this, not glass but chitin, specifically the wing casing of a cicada, yet not one native to this region of France," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He then pointed to a series of minute scratches on the wooden frame of the ventilator grill, and a faint, almost imperceptible residue clinging to the metal. The wind whistled softly through the narrow opening, carrying with it the scent of wet clay, something acrid, and the faint, far-off staccato rattle of a machine gun, a chillingly casual sound of ongoing battle. The ground here shows signs of repeated, careful placement, not casual footfall. The scratches suggest a container, perhaps of metal or wood, being repeatedly inserted or held against the ventilation intake. And this non-native insect, Watson, it mirrors precisely what we suspect afflicted the sensitive listening horns of the Salisbury device. It seems our adversaries have developed a rather ingenious, if nefarious, field deployment system for their disruptive agents, remarked Sherlock Holmes. But how could they ensure the insects reach the Sentinel from outside, Holmes? And in such numbers as to be effective? I asked, bewildered, the constant, dull thrum of distant warfare a persistent backdrop to my confusion. Asked Dr. John Watson. He gave a thin smile, his eyes bright in the lamplight. That, my dear Watson, is a question of precise acoustic engineering and perhaps a touch of entomological cunning. The evidence here is compelling, but incomplete. We have seen the what and the where. The how requires further analysis, and for that, we must consult Mr. Pendelton and the data we have gathered from the device's own operational logs. Our next stop is London, and quickly. The enemy is more resourceful than we credited, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The thought of returning to the comparative quiet of Baker Street, armed with these grim new discoveries from the very edge of no man's land, was a sobering one. The air in the dugout seemed to press in, heavy with the unspoken threat and the faint, metallic scent of fear. The only sounds now the drip of water and the far-off, mournful sigh of the wind across the desolate landscape. The silent sentinels were indeed under siege, not by shellfire, but by an insidious, almost invisible foe, and the key to their defense lay hidden within the precise nature of a sound and the creature that produced it. As we returned to London, the chill of the Channel crossing clung to us like a damp fog as we disembarked at Victoria Station. The familiar cacophony of London, steam hissing from engines, porters shouting, the distant rumble of traffic, a stark contrast to the grim realities of the Western Front, etched in our minds like a fresh, troubling scar. The evidence of sophisticated sabotage, those unnervingly resilient insects, lay carefully preserved in my medical bag. Holmes had been largely silent during our train journey, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels upon the tracks a mere accompaniment to his furious thoughts. A hansom cab, its wheels clattering on the cobbled streets, conveyed us swiftly to our first port of call, the Damascus Bureau, and the agitated figure of its chief engineer, Mr. Pendelton. We found him in his laboratory, a vast chamber where the sharp scent of ozone and hot metal mingled. The very air seemed alive, thrumming with the persistent low hum of dynamos, punctuated by the occasional sharp crackle and spit of an electrical discharge from some unseen apparatus. Blueprints and schematics were strewn across every available surface, like fallen autumn leaves after a gale, rustling faintly as drafts from the high windows stirred them. His voice, usually resonant with confidence, was strained, almost brittle. Holmes, Watson, thank heavens. Another incident, this time at the Ypres salient. The Sentinel gave a false bearing, directed our own guns. The consequences were grievous, replied Mr. Pendelton. Holmes, placing a small, sealed glass vial containing a desiccated insect upon a clear space on Pendelton's workbench, spoke with a quiet intensity. The pattern holds, Mr. Pendelton. We have identified the specific agent of disruption. The question is no longer what, but how they are so consistently introduced and more curiously sustained. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Pendelton peered at the insect, his brow furrowed. The whirring of a nearby calibration machine seemed to underscore his perplexity. He picked up the vial, his hand trembling slightly. One insect. But the device casings are sealed, rigorously tested. And to survive within, to multiply, it seems beyond the bounds of possibility, Mr. Pendelton said. Not if the species is carefully selected for its resilience and, crucially, its acoustic properties, Holmes countered, his tone sharpening with conviction. My own initial observations, and some rather crude experiments conducted in a makeshift acoustic testing room I assembled at Baker Street, pointed towards a high-frequency sound as the likely culprit. To confirm and elaborate upon this, before leaving for the front, I dispatched a query to a certain Dr. Heinrich Weber, an entomologist of German extraction, whose monograph on insect stridulation, the production of sound by rubbing body parts together, Watson, common in insects like crickets, is unparalleled. His reply arrived this morning, observed Sherlock Holmes, regarding Cicadidae acutus variant, highly specific resonant frequency, prolonged stridulation induced by minimal vibration, larval stage remarkably hardy. He paused, allowing the information to sink in. Sustenance possible in nutrient-rich paste. Suggest examining interior acoustic baffling for organic residues. Signed, Weber. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The technical terms hung in the air, the whirring of the calibration machine seeming to mark our attempts to grasp the full, insidious nature of this attack. Pendelton looked utterly bewildered. Holmes, however, seemed to draw energy from the complexity, his eyes bright. Allow me to elucidate, gentlemen. The Cicadidae acutus variant is quite simply a specific type of cicada. Dr. Weber confirms its song, a sound produced at a very high, almost inaudible, frequency is the disruptive agent. He notes its larval stage is exceptionally hardy and can be sustained by a nutrient paste. Crucially, he posits that even minimal operational vibrations from the Sentinel itself could induce what he terms prolonged stridulation. That is, the insect making its disruptive sound continuously by rubbing parts of its body together. This is the very sound that deafens your delicate device. His final suggestion is key. Examine the interior acoustic baffling for organic residues of such a paste. Nutrient-rich paste, I interjected, the implication dawning on me. You mean they are deliberately seeded, Dr. John Watson added. Precisely, Watson. The enemy is not merely relying on chance dispersal. They have cultivated a living weapon. Consider, Mr. Pendelton, the intricate internal structure of your Sentinel. Is there any component, any sealant or insulating material that could inadvertently serve as or conceal such a paste? Observed Sherlock Holmes. Pendelton stared, aghast, at the complex diagrams of his own invention. A slow dread settled upon his features. He traced a finger along a cross-section of the device's primary acoustic chamber, the stiff paper of the schematic whispering faintly beneath his touch. His voice was barely a whisper. The dampening compound. We use a new organic polymer for its superior acoustic absorption. If it were contaminated, or if a similar substance were introduced, Mr. Pendelton said, it would provide both sustenance and a hidden vector, Holmes finished, his eyes gleaming. A method ingenious in its simplicity. The insects are introduced, likely in their larval stage, within this very compound, applied during assembly, or more audaciously, during maintenance or transit. They mature, they create their disruptive high-frequency sound, they stridulate, at the precise pitch to overwhelm the Sentinel's delicate sensors, and they thrive, explained Sherlock Holmes. The three of us stood in a heavy silence for a moment, the usual hum and crackle of the laboratory suddenly muted, or perhaps merely overshadowed by the weight of the revelation. The implications settled upon us like the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light from the high windows. Outside, a distant tugboat horn on the Thames was briefly audible, a mournful sound that seemed to underscore the gravity of our discovery. The enemy possessed not only a deep understanding of acoustics and entomology, but also an intimate knowledge of the Sentinel's design, and chillingly, its production or supply chain. But to achieve this across multiple locations, Holmes, I mused, from Salisbury to the Western Front, it implies a highly coordinated effort and access. Dr. John Watson commented. Holmes nodded, his gaze distant. Indeed, Watson, the logistical chain of this sabotage is as remarkable as its scientific basis. It speaks of meticulous planning, and I fear a leak from within. The enemy knows where and when to strike. They understand the Sentinel's vulnerabilities because someone has illuminated the path for them. Sherlock Holmes responded. He turned from the workbench, his focus shifting entirely. The hum of the laboratory seemed to fade as a new, colder resolve settled in his eyes. Mr. Pendelton, we have identified the weapon and the method. Our next and most pressing task is to identify the hand that guides it. We must lay a trap, Watson, a carefully baited one, here within the walls of the Bureau itself. For the traitor, I am convinced, walks these very corridors. Following our illuminating discussion with Mr. Pendelton regarding the enemy's insidious use of non-native insects, Holmes moved with a grim alacrity. The focus had shifted from the how of the sabotage to the who, the traitor within the Damascus Bureau facilitating this audacious scheme. We found ourselves once more within the Bureau's imposing stone walls, its echoing corridors amplifying the tap of our heels on the polished floors. The familiar scent of officialdom, stale ink, old paper, and floor wax hung heavy in the air, this time mingled with the palpable tension radiating from Major Finch, who accompanied us. Holmes's voice was low and precise as he addressed the Major, cutting through the latter's restless pacing. The Bureau's security, Major, is formidable, declared Sherlock Holmes, and formidable it was. I had observed on our previous visits the layers of security, the initial identity verification at the main entrance, the coded passphrases required for access to specific wings, the heavy steel doors with their complex locking mechanisms, and the ever-watchful eyes of the uniformed guards whose patrol routes, I'd noted, were deliberately irregular and logged with precision. Entry to the records archive, for instance, typically required dual authorization and a specific time-stamped clearance. The entire edifice was designed as a fortress against intrusion. Yet our quarry navigates these labyrinthine defenses with apparent ease. This suggests an intimate knowledge, not merely of its structure, but of its very pulse, the human element, the subtle deviations, the unwritten rules. We shall, therefore, use that pulse against him. Sherlock Holmes responded. Holmes outlined his plan with quiet precision. A set of falsified documents was prepared, detailing a supposed critical flaw in a new prototype of the acoustic device. This fabricated flaw, he explained, would render it exceptionally vulnerable to a specific, easily generated counter-frequency. These papers were to be placed in a temporarily less guarded records room, a narrow chamber, smelling faintly of dust and decaying parchment, with but one exit. We would be concealed in an adjacent, disused storeroom, its air thick with the scent of forgotten files. Major Finch, his face a mask of worry, listened intently, the rhythmic tick of a nearby office clock underscoring the gravity of the moment. But Holmes, are you certain he'll take this? Fabricated bait. Good heavens, man, what if he doesn't? Or worse, what if this entire ruse compromises genuine security protocols, protocols I am sworn to uphold, said Major Alistair Finch. Holmes met his gaze, his own expression one of quiet confidence. He will take it, Major. The lure of such a devastating piece of intelligence is too potent. As for security, the true compromise lies in allowing a viper to remain coiled in your bosom, Sherlock Holmes said. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as we waited, crammed into a stuffy adjoining office. The oppressive silence was punctuated only by the muffled tick-tock of a grandfather clock echoing from the main hall, and the soft whisper of papers as guards made their rounds. Then a new sound pricked the silence. A faint, metallic scraping from the target room, a key, expertly turned in the lock. Holmes's eyes, I saw, gleamed in the sliver of dim light filtering under our door. Suddenly, a muffled thud, not from the records room, but further down the corridor, followed by hurried footsteps receding. Holmes was on his feet in an instant. He was alerted, or he has an accomplice creating a diversion. Come, Watson. Finch, Holmes barked, his voice cutting through the sudden commotion. Secure the bureau, our quarry flees to the street. A fleeting shadow disappeared around a far corner. The chase was on. We burst from the bureau's side entrance out into the damp London night, the sudden chill raising gooseflesh. Slick cobblestones reflected the flickering orange glow of gaslight as we plunged into the darkness. The air was heavy with the scent of coal smoke, wet earth, and the faint, metallic tang of the nearby river. Our quarry was swift, his footfalls a rapid tattoo on the stone as he darted through narrow alleyways. These tight passages, flanked by tall, dark buildings, amplified the sounds of our pursuit, our own hurried steps, the rasp of our breathing. I could hear Holmes's steady, controlled breaths beside me, a testament to his surprising endurance. He led us a merry dance through a labyrinth of back streets. The sounds of the sleeping city swirled around us, distant, indistinct shouts, the low rumble of a late-night omnibus on a parallel thoroughfare, the mournful, echoing cry of a foghorn from the Thames, a chaotic symphony to our desperate pursuit. Then, as he attempted to scale a low, crumbling brick wall into a disused yard littered with unseen debris, Holmes, with a sudden, surprising burst of speed, lunged. A grunt, and he had the man by the ankle. There was a brief, desperate struggle in the gloom of the yard. A flurry of limbs, the thud of bodies against the damp earth, punctuated by harsh, tearing gasps for air. With my assistance, we soon had the man subdued, his struggles ceasing beneath our combined weight. He was wiry, dressed in dark, unremarkable clothing that blended with the shadows. His face, illuminated briefly by a match Holmes struck, was pale and set in a defiant scowl. A quick search of his pockets revealed not only a small, sophisticated listening device, but also papers that bore the unmistakable stamp of a foreign intelligence service. You meddling English, you'll get nothing from me. My silence is bought and paid for, said foreign agent. Holmes's voice, though heaving slightly from the exertion, held a note of grim satisfaction as he surveyed our captive. Well, Watson, it appears our informant is rather more than a simple bureaucrat with loose loyalties. This is a professional, and I suspect he has much to tell us, Sherlock Holmes noted. A professional, Holmes? Good Lord. Do you suppose he's the one who introduced those wretched insects? This web is far more tangled than I first perceived, Dr. John Watson commented. We bundled our captive into a waiting hansom cab, its door creaking shut with a decisive thud. The clatter of its iron-shod wheels on the stone-paved street provided a rhythmic, almost hypnotic counterpoint to the thoughts racing through my mind. The chill of the late autumn night seemed to seep into my very bones, a damp cold that promised winter. Yet, it was the cold certainty in Holmes's eyes, visible in the fleeting light of passing street lamps, that truly sent a shiver down my spine. To the safe house, Watson. It is time for our guest to become communicative, replied Sherlock Holmes. The cab rattled on through the deserted streets, its rhythmic sway a stark contrast to the turmoil of recent events. We were being carried towards a night that promised further, perhaps darker, revelations. The traitor was caught, yes, but the full extent of his treachery, the identities of those shadowy figures he served, and the true purpose behind the insect sabotage remained shrouded, waiting to be unveiled. The aftermath of the chase and capture left an almost palpable tension in the air. Our prisoner, a wiry fellow with eyes that darted like trapped birds, was now secured in a stark, windowless room within the military compound. The only furnishings were a plain wooden table and 3 chairs. A single, bare electric bulb cast harsh shadows, making the room feel colder than it was. The metallic tang of fear and stale tobacco smoke hung heavy. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and devoid of any inflection. "Your silence, sir, is as uninformative as it is predictable. However, the mud on your left boot heel, a peculiar reddish clay, is it not, tells a more compelling tale," stated Sherlock Holmes. The agent's eyes flickered downwards for a fraction of a second. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. The only sounds were the agent's ragged breathing and the distant, rhythmic stamp of boots on the parade ground, a dull thudding that seemed to mark time. That particular clay is found in only one location within a 20-mile radius, the embankment near the old railway cutting, a spot conveniently shielded from prying eyes, and I might add, directly on the path to Dr. Webber's secluded cottage, explained Sherlock Holmes. The agent remained mute, but a bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. Holmes continued, his tone sharpening almost imperceptibly. "You were his courier, I presume, or perhaps something more integral to his rather specialized entomological studies," Sherlock Holmes responded. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a harsh rasp, laced with a thick accent I could not immediately place. "You know nothing, Englishman." He spat the last word with venom, remarked captured foreign agent. "On the contrary," Holmes countered smoothly, "I know you carry a coded message, likely in a microdot concealed within the lining of your collar, standard practice for operatives of the Abteilung IB, stated Sherlock Holmes. He paused, his sharp eyes missing no detail of the agent's subtle flinch, the slight widening of his eyes, before he delivered the true blow. "And I know that Dr. Heinrich Weber is not merely a harmless insect enthusiast, but Hauptmann Dietrich Vogel, a key intelligence strategist for the German Imperial Staff." The agent's composure shattered. His face, already pale, became ashen. "I confess, Holmes, I was utterly taken aback by the certainty in your voice and the gravity of your assertion. Good heavens, Weber, a German Hauptmann. The implications are unthinkable," remarked Dr. John Watson. Indeed, the very notion sent a chill down my spine. The eccentric academic we had briefly encountered, now revealed as a key enemy strategist. It was a revelation of the most profound and disturbing order. He spat, his defiance a brittle facade. "Vogel is a ghost. You cannot prove this," captured foreign agent answered. "The proof," Holmes stated, his eyes glinting, "is already en route to those who can verify his service records. Your capture, my friend, has merely accelerated the inevitable. You would do well to consider your position," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The heavy door of the interrogation room clicked shut behind us, a sound that seemed to seal the agent's fate. As we left the thoroughly demoralized agent in military custody, our footsteps echoed urgently through the corridors. The gravity of our discovery propelled us towards Major Finch's office. The air, thick with the scent of floor wax and official documents, did little to calm my nerves. Holmes, however, appeared invigorated, his mind clearly racing, piecing together this new, far more dangerous puzzle. Major Finch looked up from a mound of paperwork as we entered, his expression one of weary impatience. The rhythmic tick-tock of a large grandfather clock in the corner seemed to amplify the tension in the room. His voice was clipped, every syllable echoing the parade ground. "Holmes, Watson, report. This had better be critical. My desk is currently under siege by the Hun, if only on paper," answered Major Alastair Finch. "Indeed, Major," Holmes replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Our problem with the acoustic device is far more insidious than mere technical malfunction or simple sabotage. We are contending with a masterstroke of espionage," Sherlock Holmes noted. Finch, who had been about to speak, closed his mouth, his gaze sharpening on Holmes. The air in the office suddenly felt charged. Dr. Heinrich Weber, as he styles himself, is in fact Hauptmann Dietrich Vogel of German Imperial Intelligence, replied Sherlock Holmes. Finch's pen clattered onto his desk. He stared at Holmes, his face slowly draining of color. The implications for the security of the entire Damascus Bureau, and indeed the wider Allied intelligence network, were dire. His voice, usually so commanding, cracked. Vogel, Hauptmann Dietrich Vogel, operating under our very noses. By God, Holmes, if this is true, the security implications are your sources unimpeachable, responded Major Alastair Finch. The evidence is compelling, Major, and corroboration is forthcoming. His expertise in acoustics, particularly concerning insect stridulation, was no mere academic pursuit, declared Sherlock Holmes. I saw Finch lean forward, the papers on his desk forgotten. The Major, a man not easily impressed, was clearly grasping the enormity of the situation. It was the foundation for a sophisticated countermeasure, meticulously designed to cripple our detection capabilities. We believe it involved broadcasting specific frequencies to confuse the Sentinel device, or perhaps even to feed it false positives, thereby instigating those tragic, friendly fire incidents, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The distant sound of a bugle call drifted through the window, a mournful counterpoint to the grim reality unfolding within Finch's office. Our immediate task, Major, is twofold. We must understand the precise nature of Vogel's acoustic interference and develop a counter. Simultaneously, we must dismantle his network before further damage is inflicted. Time, I fear, is a luxury we no longer possess. The revelations concerning Dr. Weber had cast a grim shadow, and our subsequent urgent consultation with Major Finch had been fraught with tension. Now, within the echoing confines of the Damascus Bureau workshop, the air thrummed with a different kind of energy, a frantic race against a cunningly concealed enemy. The usual scent of solder and ozone, now mingled with the faint, acrid tang of overworked circuits, was sharp in my nostrils, punctuated by the rhythmic hiss and occasional sharp crackle of some new apparatus Mr. Pendelton was coaxing into life. Pendelton, Holmes interjected, his voice sharp with sudden insight. Your device, exquisitely sensitive to artillery vibrations, yes. But what of other, more subtle frequencies? He paused, letting the tension build. Our Dr. Weber, it transpires, is an entomologist of some repute, explained Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Pendelton, his brow furrowed and spectacles askew, ceased his tinkering. A low hum from a nearby dynamo was the only sound for a moment. He sputtered, his voice a blend of incredulity and affront. Insects, Mr. Holmes. You seriously propose? Insect frequencies? Why, the very notion. With all due respect, sir, this device is shielded against the thunder of a full barrage, the very din of war itself, not the buzzing of a fly. It is, if you'll forgive my bluntness, a most outlandish theory, responded Mr. Pendelton. Not interference, my dear sir, but mimicry. Consider the cicada, its song capable of remarkable volume and specific pitch. If Weber has found a way to amplify or direct such natural sounds, or even synthetically replicate them at frequencies that confound your machine, it would explain the sporadic, seemingly random malfunctions. We must devise a filter, a counter-frequency, to isolate the true signal from this insidious acoustic camouflage, observed Sherlock Holmes. Pendelton's initial indignation gave way to a feverish concentration. Discarded sketches littered the floor around his stool as he began to sketch furiously anew upon a slate, muttering calculations. The sharp clatter of his chalk was a frantic counterpoint to the steady, deep thrum of the workshop's generators. Hours bled into one another in this intense labor, the air growing thick with chalk dust and the metallic scent of exertion, Holmes occasionally offering a pointed suggestion, until at last Pendelton declared, with a weary but triumphant note, that a rudimentary countermeasure was ready for testing. Our next theater of operations was a stark briefing room on the university grounds, the chill of the stone walls seeping into our bones. Major Finch, his uniform immaculate, listened with ill-concealed impatience as Holmes laid out his plan to ensnare Weber. The distant, rhythmic thud of marching boots from the parade square provided a somber backdrop. His voice was clipped, edged with a familiar exasperation. A clandestine meeting, Holmes. And on what firm evidence is this venture predicated precisely? Or are we once more to rely upon your celebrated intuitions? Major Alastair Finch answered. Based, Major, on the intercepted communications, we now understand. Weber frequents a disused botanical society reading room on the north side of the campus. It offers seclusion and multiple egress routes, ideal for his purposes. He is due to meet a contact tonight. We shall be there to greet them, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Finch, though clearly preferring a more direct military approach, conceded, his jaw tight. The plan was set. As dusk settled, casting long, eerie shadows across the manicured lawns of the university, we took our positions. The chosen reading room was an annex, its air heavy with the scent of decaying paper, old leather, and damp earth. A loose windowpane in its ill-fitting frame rattled softly, almost mournfully, in the evening breeze, a lonely, persistent sound against the deepening silence of the campus. Holmes and I concealed ourselves behind a towering bookcase, while Finch's men, shadows in the gloom, secured the perimeter. The silence stretched, taut and expectant. A distant college clock chimed, each resonant note heightening the tension. Then a creak. A floorboard near the entrance protested under cautious weight. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the dim light from the corridor. Dr. Weber, his posture betraying no hint of alarm. He was followed by another, slighter man. His voice cut through the stillness, sharp as breaking glass. Dr. Weber, I presume, your study of acoustics has been most illuminating, particularly your application of insect sonics to the art of deception, explained Sherlock Holmes. Weber froze. His companion made a sudden move, but the quiet click of a pistol hammer from one of Finch's men stopped him short. Weber, recovering his composure with remarkable speed, turned slowly. His voice, though regaining its customary smoothness, now carried an unmistakable chill, like ice forming on still water. Mr. Holmes, you are, I confess, a most unwelcome variable. It appears my modest foray into applied bioacoustics has garnered a rather more intrusive peer review than I had anticipated, answered Dr. Heinrich Weber. Indeed. Your network's performance is now concluded, Doctor. The curtain falls, explained Sherlock Holmes. At Holmes's signal, Finch's men moved in swiftly. There was a brief scuffle, a muffled exclamation, then the decisive snap of handcuffs. The spies were secured. As they were led away, the only sounds were the heavy tread of boots on the wooden floor and the distant, mournful cry of an owl. The immediate threat was neutralized, yet I knew the repercussions of this night's work were far from over. Holmes caught my eye, a flicker of grim satisfaction in his. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. Now, Watson, for the unraveling. Major Finch will wish for a full account, and Mr. Pendelton will be most eager to hear of our field test. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The dust had barely settled from our recent exertions. The air in the Damascus Bureau was still thick with unspoken relief. Major Finch, his uniform immaculate as ever, presided over a small table. The usual taut lines around his mouth had softened somewhat. Opposite him, Mr. Pendelton fidgeted with a pencil, his earlier agitation replaced by a nervous energy that was almost boyish. His voice was clipped, yet held a note of profound satisfaction. A most efficient resolution, Mr. Holmes. The network has been neutralized, and Dr. Weber is providing surprisingly fulsome cooperation, remarked Major Alastair Finch. He interjected, his words tumbling out with enthusiasm. And the Sentinel, Mr. Holmes. Your insights into the subtle acoustic sabotage, quite brilliant. We have implemented the shielding modifications precisely as you suggested, Mr. Pendelton replied. My companion inclined his head slightly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. The ingenuity of man, Mr. Pendelton, is matched only by his capacity for deception. The core issue was never a flaw in your magnificent device, but rather a clever exploitation of its very sensitivity, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Later that week, we found ourselves upon the wind-swept expanse of Salisbury Plain. Under a sky the color of slate, the experimental station stood before us, a collection of stark huts and strange antennae. It hummed with renewed purpose. A biting wind whipped around us, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil. In the distance, a curlew's mournful cry pierced the air. Mr. Pendelton, bundled against the chill, supervised the final adjustments to the acoustic detector. Sergeant Rostova stood nearby, her expression unreadable, her gaze fixed upon the intricate machinery. Then the test commenced. A series of controlled detonations, miles distant, sent their shockwaves across the plain. We listened, not to the raw explosions, but to the translated signals within the listening hut. A crisp, distinct series of pips and tones emerged from the apparatus, clear, precise, and utterly unambiguous. The earlier distortions, the phantom echoes that had sown such chaos, were blessedly absent. A low murmur of approval went through the assembled technicians. Perfect, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. It is perfect. The Sentinel hears true once more, Mr. Pendelton replied. On our return journey, the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels against the tracks provided a steady cadence to our thoughts. The green fields of England rushed past the window, a stark contrast to the arid landscapes we had so recently left. A remarkable piece of work, Holmes, I ventured, both the device and your unraveling of its troubles. Dr. John Watson replied. He stared out at the fleeting scenery, his expression contemplative. Indeed, Watson, each technological leap forward in warfare presents a new frontier for the contest of wits. The Sentinel is a marvel, but it also underscores a fundamental truth, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside for a moment before continuing, his voice retaining its thoughtful cadence. The most sophisticated machine remains vulnerable to the simplest, yet most cunning, of human interventions. It is a battle that will be fought and refought in ever more complex arenas, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Before we departed the vicinity of the Damascus Bureau for good, Holmes sought out Sergeant Rostova. We found her in a quiet annex. The faint scent of ozone from nearby electrical equipment perfumed the air. She looked up as we approached, a flicker of surprise in her usually stoic eyes. His tone was unexpectedly gentle. Sergeant Rostova, your acute hearing was instrumental. Though initially misdirected by Weber's machinations, your observations provided a crucial baseline against which the sabotage could be measured. Her voice was low yet steady. I am glad to have been of service, Mr. Holmes. The silence, it is different now, cleaner. A brief, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Thank you, remarked Sergeant Eva Rostova. Back within the familiar confines of 221B Baker Street, the fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows upon the walls. The distant rumble of London's traffic was a comforting, familiar sound. Holmes had already retrieved his violin, and the first mournful notes began to fill the room. He paused, bow hovering over the strings. Science, Watson, forges weapons for all sides. The true victory lies not merely in possessing the sharper sword, but in understanding the mind that wields it. He then resumed his playing, a complex melody that seemed to speak of challenges met and the enduring, intricate dance of human intellect. Observed Sherlock Holmes. The case of the silent sentinel was closed, its echoes absorbed into the greater symphony of the ongoing war. Yet I knew that for Holmes, the quiet satisfaction of this resolution was but a brief interlude before the next discordant note demanded his attention, the next enigma his unparalleled mind.